The sun had barely risen when the call came in. A wildfire had erupted overnight, tearing through dry brush and crawling toward the outskirts of our small suburban community. Flames leapt between hills like predators, devouring everything in their path. Smoke darkened the skies and ash rained like snow, coating rooftops, lawns, and cars. The school sat on the edge of the evacuation zone, its halls packed with children awaiting rescue. Parents were stuck on the other side of town, unable to reach their kids, and emergency services were stretched thin, prioritizing more populated neighborhoods. That's when I knew we had to act fast. We had planned for emergencies, had practiced fire drills and coordinated with the local authorities, but nothing prepares you for a crisis this immediate and this dangerous. I was coordinating transportation logistics, helping to organize a convoy of school buses to shuttle the kids to safety. We had everything lined up. Drivers on standby, buses fueled and ready, routes mapped. But the moment we reached the exit of the school's back road, everything came to a grinding halt. There she stood, Karen, president of the Homeowners Association. Arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like a badge of entitlement, flanked by 2 orange traffic cones and a makeshift, private road, no school traffic, sign. Her stance was defiant, immovable. "You're not bringing those buses through here," she snapped, as if the sirens and billowing smoke in the distance weren't evidence enough of the situation's urgency. "This is private property. These roads can't handle that kind of weight." I tried to reason with her, calmly at first. "Karen, there are over 300 kids in that school. The fire's less than 5 miles out. We need to get them out now. This is the fastest route to the freeway." She didn't budge. "That's not my problem. These roads were paid for by our HOA dues, not by the school district. We already have traffic issues as it is. And besides, if one of your buses damages the pavement, who's going to pay for repairs?" Certainly not the HOA. It felt surreal. I looked behind me at the idling buses, lined up like lifelines, engines humming, drivers peering out their windows with concern. I looked past her toward the thickening haze over the hills, where the fire crept ever closer. And I looked at her again, standing in the middle of the road like a gatekeeper of madness, willing to risk children's lives over asphalt. When pleading and logic failed, I called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later, an eternity when flames are on the move. They tried to talk her down, but she insisted the road was private property, waving documents and citing clauses from her HOA binder like it was scripture. The officers couldn't legally force her to move without a court order unless the fire was declared an imminent threat to the specific area, which, according to their superiors, it wasn't yet. That was the tipping point. I stepped aside, pulled out my phone, and made another call. My brother, Lucas, was a former military pilot who now ran a charter helicopter company specializing in emergency airlifts and aerial inspections. We hadn't spoken much since our dad's funeral. He'd gone one way, I'd gone another, but I didn't have the luxury of holding on to grudges. I told him what was happening. To my surprise, he didn't hesitate. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. And he delivered. 28 minutes later, the thump-thump-thump of rotors thundered over the school. 3 black and yellow helicopters descended like angels of mercy, touching down in the open field adjacent to the gymnasium. The children stared wide-eyed, some crying, some cheering, all clutching their backpacks like parachutes. Teachers and aides ushered them in, organizing them by grade, loading them with the urgency of a wartime extraction. From the top of the hill, Karen watched in stunned silence, her mouth slightly open. She pointed up at the sky as if trying to rally the police to stop us again, but they had no jurisdiction here. The airspace was clear, the school had granted permission, and the field was technically public land, just outside the HOA's borders. We were operating within full legal rights, and she couldn't do a thing about it. As the helicopters took off in rounds, ferrying 30 students at a time to a predesignated safe zone across town, I stood in the field, guiding them in and helping the little ones climb aboard. Ash fell in my hair, and the heat in the air was rising. The smoke made my throat raw, but adrenaline kept me moving. Each liftoff was another sigh of relief. Another batch of lives no longer at risk. Karen stormed off at some point, perhaps realizing her power had reached its limit. The police eventually left too, acknowledging they'd done all they could. The buses remained parked near the school, their drivers eventually dismissed. I sent a text to Lucas after the final helicopter touched down at the safe zone. "You saved them. Thank you." He replied with a simple thumbs up emoji, followed by, "You would have done the same for me." The fire never reached the school, but it got close enough to warrant the evacuation. Authorities later praised our actions. Local news covered the helicopter rescue, painting it as an example of community resilience. They didn't mention Karen by name, but everyone knew. Everyone had seen. In the days that followed, parents demanded answers. The school district opened an inquiry. The city council began reviewing emergency access regulations on private roads. Karen's days as HOA president were numbered, and she knew it. Her letter of resignation arrived within the week, slipped quietly into mailboxes without signature or apology. Looking back, I don't take pride in outmaneuvering her. I take pride in the kids, scared but brave, some clutching each other's hands, others offering their seats to the younger ones. I take pride in the teachers who stayed calm, the aides who kept roll call amid chaos, the pilots who didn't flinch. And yes, in the end, I took pride in not letting bureaucracy, entitlement, or ego get in the way of doing what was right. Because when children's lives are on the line, no HOA rule, no property sign, no so-called authority should stand in the way. Not then. Not ever. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, not in the emotional sense, but in the eerie calm that came with a town caught between outrage and disbelief. While the wildfire was eventually contained a few miles from the school, the scars it left weren't only in the blackened hills or scorched trees. The real damage was social, communal. People were angry, not at nature, at each other. Karen had vanished from public view almost entirely. Her once weekly HOA emails, peppered with passive-aggressive reminders about lawn care and trash bins, ceased. The neighborhood message board, usually brimming with her authoritative posts, had turned into a war zone. Some of her supporters, a small but vocal minority, defended her actions with half-hearted arguments about property rights. Most others, however, condemned her outright. Screenshots of her confrontation with the police circulated widely, and someone had even leaked a video from a bystander, capturing the moment she refused to move as the school buses sat helplessly nearby. The footage went viral locally, then beyond. I tried to stay out of the politics. I wasn't interested in revenge, just resolution. But resolution didn't come easily. At the next school board meeting, parents filled the auditorium to capacity. Some stood in the aisles, arms folded, brows furrowed, demanding answers. Why was the school's evacuation plan dependent on routes that could be blocked by a single individual? Who had authority in such a situation? Could this happen again? I was asked to speak, not as an official, but as the person who initiated the helicopter evacuation. I stood at the podium and told the story plainly, no embellishment, no dramatic flair. I described the moment we realized the buses couldn't pass. I explained the legal gridlock that tied the hands of the responding officers. And I told them why I called my brother, how the choppers saved us when bureaucracy failed us. When I finished, a moment of silence settled in the room. Then came the applause. It wasn't for me, it was for the children, the staff, the pilots, and the sheer fact that we hadn't lost anyone. But beneath the gratitude was frustration. And questions that couldn't be ignored. Karen never showed. Her resignation from the HOA became official that same week. Rumors circulated. Some said she had left town entirely, others claimed she was still living in the neighborhood but refused to leave her house. I didn't care much either way. My focus was on rebuilding trust, between the school, the parents, and the community that had come too close to disaster. One afternoon, about 10 days after the fire, I returned to the school. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the halls, but the building was intact. Teachers were trying to bring some normalcy back. Kids were drawing pictures of helicopters, firefighters, and heroes with capes. One crayon drawing showed a stick figure Karen with big red X's drawn over her. I gently suggested we keep the focus on the positive, not the negative. I went out back to the field where the helicopters had landed. The grass had been flattened in spots, and a few temporary orange cones marked off areas for reseeding. It was just a field, but to me, it had become a symbol of action over paralysis, courage over rules. My brother had saved the day, but I knew he hadn't done it for the town. He'd done it for me. For family. We hadn't talked much since that day. The texts had stopped again, both of us retreating into our lives, our patterns. I wasn't sure what to say to him. So much of our history was knotted with tension. But standing there, I pulled out my phone and typed a simple message, "Come by sometime. The kids want to meet their pilot." He didn't reply immediately, but 3 days later, he did. When he arrived, it was without fanfare, just a dusty black pickup pulling into the school lot. He stepped out wearing sunglasses and his usual faded leather jacket, the one he'd worn even back in high school. The kids swarmed him before he could make it to the doors. Word had spread, and to them, he was a real-life superhero. He knelt to talk to them, signed notebooks, answered their questions. One little boy asked if he could fly one day too. Lucas smiled and told him, "Absolutely. If you work hard and care about people, the sky opens up." Later, we sat on the bench behind the gym, drinking lukewarm coffee from the teacher's lounge. We didn't talk much at first. Just watched the sun start to dip behind the hills that had once been on fire. "I didn't do it for her," he said finally. "The lady, I didn't even know who she was." "I know. I did it because you called. You never call when you're in trouble. I was in over my head. You handled it." That was the extent of our reconciliation. No big emotional breakthrough, no dramatic hugs. Just two brothers sharing a bench, finally seeing eye to eye for once. It was enough. The district eventually passed new emergency protocols. Roads previously marked as private were reclassified for emergency use under disaster conditions. The city council pushed for an ordinance requiring all HOAs to include emergency override clauses in their charters. Slowly, change came, not because of pressure alone, but because the community had been rattled into awareness. I found myself stepping into a strange new role. Not a leader, not exactly, but a connector. People started coming to me with ideas, questions, concerns. I didn't have all the answers, but I listened. I tried to help, and over time, the bitterness began to dissolve. People came together for school cleanups, neighborhood forums, fire preparedness workshops. That tension, once thick enough to choke on, began to lift. And then one day, Karen reappeared. It was a cool morning, and I was helping repaint the curb lines in the school lot. A familiar white SUV pulled up, and out stepped Karen, clutching a manila envelope. She looked older, thinner maybe, with a hint of exhaustion around her eyes. She walked over to me, her expression unreadable. "I came to apologize," she said. "I didn't respond right away. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I wasn't seeing the bigger picture. I didn't realize how fast things were moving, or how much was at stake." I nodded slowly. "People were scared." "I know," she said, quietly. "I was too." She handed me the envelope and turned to leave. Inside were signed affidavits, relinquishing any future law objections to the use of private roads for emergency access. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. As she drove away, I looked around at the school, the freshly painted lines, the teachers laughing inside, the children playing in the field that once held the weight of emergency blades. We had all been changed. Not just by fire, or smoke, or helicopters, but by the realization that rules mean nothing without heart. And when lives are on the line, especially those of children, the only true authority is the one that chooses compassion over control.